Hello and welcome as we continue this journey toward the ninth Sunday after Pentecost, July the 25th, 2021. Today we'll be looking at the Gospel reading for Sunday, which comes from St. John in the 6th chapter, verses 1 through 21. Glory to you, O Lord. The introduction to the reading is: in John's Gospel, the miracles of Jesus are called signs because they reveal the true character of God. As such, they remain within the mystery of God and cannot be brought under human control. Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up the mountain and sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread enough for these people to eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated, so also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I. Do not be afraid." Then they wanted to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the land toward which they were going. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Today's reading is quite lengthy, at least for any attempt to address everything contained in this reading, all of these verses, with any degree of satisfaction, at least on my part. Today's reading contains 2 of something we would typically refer to as miracles. And these 2 events are distinct, one from the other: the feeding of 5,000 and walking on water. John's Gospel does not refer to these types of events as miracles. Rather, they are called signs, which would be more in keeping with what I have learned and taught about the purpose of these miraculous signs. The introduction to today's Gospel reading states, in John's Gospel, the miracles of Jesus are called signs because they reveal the true character of God. Signs point us toward something rather than becoming the end of the journey for us. Whenever we have covered miracles in Bible studies that I've led before this, I've cautioned against us becoming overly focused on the miracle, because these signs are intended to point us toward the teaching that Jesus is giving, or that one of the apostles is giving. As the focus of our attention, it should be on learning the teaching, not the sign or the miracle. It's easier for us to focus on the miracle itself, often to the detriment of the teaching. Our attention is drawn to the spectacular, the nature of the miraculous sign, and generally that event makes us want to see more. I can do it again. We're like children awestruck by a magician, and we want to see them do more. Oh, that's so cool, do it again, or do something else. Well, that same type of thing happened in Jesus' day too. After Jesus heals people in the crowd, the next day, more people are brought to Jesus to see him do it again. That's how today's gospel reading opens. They were bringing more people to Jesus. The crowds followed him. The verses following today's reading in John chapter 6 tells of the people getting into boats and traveling to where Jesus and the disciples went. And when they question Jesus, leaving them, Jesus essentially tells them they did not follow him because they understood the signs. They followed in order to see him produce more bread for them to eat. In other words, let us see you do that bread trick again, Jesus. The feeding of the 5,000 from today's reading certainly connects to the feeding story from this Sunday's first reading, 2 Kings 4:42-44, in which Elisha trusts Yahweh's word and instructs the man bringing a bread offering to give it to the people, the crowd. The twist in today's reading is that Jesus is supposedly testing Philip and the others, perhaps to ascertain, how much do you trust me? Or how much do you trust God? And the disciples are given a response similar to the man from the Elisha story in the first reading. There's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. What are they among so many people? It's a valid question. The story of the feeding of the 5,000 is the only miracle or sign, if you will, story that can be found in all 4 Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The only one that's found in all 4. Therefore, it may have become so familiar that we read past some significant sentences. For example, in today's reading, verse 11 reads, "Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, broke them and distributed them to those who were seated, and also the fish, as much as they wanted." Some of you, now hearing that as a standalone sentence, may be thinking, that sounds very familiar. It sounds like the story of the Last Supper, when Jesus has the disciples in the upper room, and Jesus took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and gave it to all the disciples to eat, and then he did the same with the cup of wine, and this the very words of institution that we use during Holy Communion for worship. And just when you think you are connecting all the dots, you remember that during my Maundy Thursday sermon I pointed out John's Gospel does not say anything about the bread and wine at the Last Supper. John's Gospel instead tells the story of Jesus washing the disciples' feet. Well, now this is confusing. We thought we connected this story to Holy Communion, except John doesn't talk about Holy Communion, he talks about washing feet. Clear as mud, right? Well, also different from the other three gospel versions of the feeding of the 5,000. John has Jesus distribute the bread and the fish from his own hands, while the other three tell us that the disciples distributed the bread and the fish. So, well, why is that significant? I'm glad you asked. The original, or the other three gospel versions, may be interpreted as some kind of church hierarchy, if you will. That is, only special people are supposed to do ministry. We should know by now that's not true. In John's version, the people experienced direct intimacy from Jesus' hand. And it involves ordinary food on an ordinary day, which we may interpret that Jesus' Eucharistic presence is meant to be understood as an experience for everyday, ordinary life, not only for special rites during worship. The barley loaves and the dried fish, those were the typical food for the poor of Jesus' day. These two details add to the understanding of the people's response. Verse 15 says, "When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself." A more literal translation for the word withdrew may be that Jesus fled. He ran away. Perhaps more evidence for what we hear Jesus saying to the crowd later in chapter 6, that they are focused on food that fills their bellies rather than the food of eternal life. Most of us, at least watching this video, may not focus on the food that fills our bellies, especially me, who obviously does not lack for food. Yet what other things might we focus on receiving from Jesus' hand, to the detriment of focusing on the person of Jesus as the Christ who brings eternal salvation? Things like healing, money, a loved one's job search, loneliness, financial stability, security, retirement, for those of us not already retired, independence, assisted living, grief, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. You can add more things to that list, I'm sure, that we want Jesus to provide for us, even from his own hand. Yet the question we need to ask ourselves, or maybe two questions really, are we looking for a miracle? Or are we looking for a sign pointing to Jesus/God, the source of salvation and eternal life, that which will completely satisfy? Nothing wrong with miracles. Yet, we need to understand miracles provide temporary satisfaction. Perhaps for a day, perhaps a little longer. Then the next pressing need draws our attention and we go looking for another miracle. Lord, I need. In today's gospel, the crowd chases after Jesus the next day, looking for another miracle. Hey, Jesus, can you do that bread trick again, please? Their need was real. I'm not downplaying the need. our needs are real. I'm not downplaying our needs. The caution is becoming overly focused on the most pressing need for today and how that might distract us from the bigger picture need, salvation, fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ. Thank you for joining me today for we prepare for this 9th Sunday after the Pentecost, July the 25th, 2021. If you have a thought or a concern or a comment or a question, just leave it in the comment section below this video. And I hope you're having a great day. Take care and God bless.